Thank you, Bob. Our fourth speaker is Reynold Hert, CEO of the BC Forest Safety Council. Reynold has been in the forest industry since 1978, starting out with Procter & Gamble Canadian Lumber. There's a name we haven't heard for a long time. And Weyerhaeuser's Canadian Forest Lands Division. Before joining the BC Forest Safety Council, Reynold was President and Chief Executive Officer of Western Forest Products, where he oversaw the development and implementation of significant safety improvements within the company. I would say that Reynold champions the philosophy that forestry operations that get it, that integrate and promote safety as a critical part of the business, do see the benefits, which include reduced frequency and severity of injuries, lower costs, higher productivity, and enhanced worker morale. Please join me in welcoming Reynold Hert.
I'd really like to echo what Bob said. Thank you very much for being here this afternoon. It really indicates the level of support that there is for change. And being here now, I'm going to challenge you a little bit. We actually have the opportunity with a number of people who are in this room to change the forest industry even more than it has changed in the last little while, simply because it takes people who are willing to make a change to get a different result. And you're all here. It shows me you have an interest in it. What I'm going to do as I go through this is comment a little bit on where we've come from, but also some opportunities on how to really achieve that safety culture. But let me tell you right off the bat, I really don't even like the word safety culture. And in trying to achieve the result of safety, I would actually say, don't use the word too much. A lot of people really don't have a good, clear understanding of what that is and what they have to do in order to be it. If you have a new driver in your family and you say to your child, take the keys, take the car, go forth, be safe, what do they do? What do they do? Achieving a place where people go home injury-free is actually a combination of two factors, from the heart and from the head. We've made a lot of progress because people have been working from the heart, and that's been a big change. Our next challenge to get off that plateau that we saw in the statistics is actually going to take a combination of from the heart and from the head to make a big change. Culture. It starts since we're talking about that. What is culture? The practices that you see. In other words, if you go into a place, what do you actually see people doing? The value that's right underneath that, some people could call that attitude, anchored by the belief. Hey, if you're in a culture where you believe that the crops will fail unless you make a human sacrifice every year to the gods, to the broad benefit of everybody, what happens in that culture? Well, once a year they sacrifice somebody. Belief, value for the whole practice. Okay? If you want to change that, change the belief. At some point in time, people realize, you know what? The weather's the weather and you don't have to do that. It's all going to be okay anyway, and we don't do that anymore in the world. We change rapidly. So let's talk a little bit about that. Let's go through that. But I'd like to start with a personal story of change for myself. I would say that I always had safety from the heart. And I would say that I was in an organization at that time, Procter & Gamble, that really had a strong value of safety. We had all the typical safety programs, we had the slogans, we had the value, but I could not practice it every day as front and center of mind. Oftentimes it was, oh yeah, I got to come up with a topic for the safety meeting next week. But I was in the business of producing lumber. And the two were separated. And one day, and we had been, I'm going back a little bit in time, I was a mill manager at the time. We had been working on bringing in lockout because we'd had a number of incidents because of lockout, and we had now been working on lockout for a year, and you know what? We were still working it. You'd think it'd be simple. You'd think that this is for the benefit of the worker, the benefit of the employee. You come out and say, here's a company policy, here's why we're doing it, we want you to go home every night. And during that year, we had disciplined a number of people, we had terminated individuals, and one day I'm walking along the trim line and I see an individual do something that they shouldn't do, step out of their working area, chase a board down just at the lug loader, grab onto the edge of the table, lean in full body, grab that board, pull it back, straighten it out, send it through. And I'm appalled. I'm going, here we go again. Geez, I've got a lockout problem. So I walk up to the individual and I say, look, I saw what you did and I appreciate what you did. And think about that for a moment. That individual at 24 was willing to risk their fingers and arm to keep that mill running. This is not an issue of dedication. I've got an incredibly dedicated worker here. But I said, you know, we've got a lockout policy, you know, you need to stop, you need to test start before you get into the process. And he turns to me and he says, well, I could do that, but if I do that, this mill won't run. Remember that statement, this mill won't run. Okay? I said, look, I hear what you're saying. I'll take full responsibility if the mill doesn't run. I need you to do the lockout. He says, I'll do it for you. 90 times that shift. Now, that particular trim line at the time was putting 20,000 boards a shift through. So 90 times as a percentage wasn't big, but every time the individual had to stop the process, go to the disconnect, do the lockout, go to the start button, do the test start, and then get it, and then go take the locks off, minute at a time. So now we're losing 90 minutes out of an 8-hour shift. Big impact. A couple of things strike you right off the bat. We had all different kinds of operators working at this station. This is common practice. Day shift, night shift, because none of the other operators, none of the other shifts, we weren't seeing this 90 minutes of downtime. So I knew all of a sudden, boy, we got this issue is deeper than just this one individual. Well, being production-oriented, we put our best engineer and our best maintenance person to take a look at what's causing this individual to lock out the shift, to have to lock out so many times. Took them a day, and they came back, you know, they said there's been a problem since day one of installation in the timing of that equipment on these certain types of boards. It does this, that leads to the problem. We fixed it. And what do you think happened the very next shift? We had our best shift ever. The rest of that week was the best week we'd ever had, and the following month was the best month we'd ever had. Because we fixed a fundamental problem in the mill. So this is my personal turning point where all of a sudden I'm going, oh my gosh, this individual reaching in and locking out and all the others was covering up a fundamental design problem we've had or installation problem we've been living with every day. Now I want to back up to what culture is and a little bit of why was this happening and why did the individual do this. And this is fundamental to kind of thinking, where do you go forward? What's our big challenge as an industry? What did the individual say to me, his first words, when I said, I can't have you do that? This mill won't run. For years, as far back as that mill had been operating, the first question when the mill was down and a manager came up or a shift supervisor came up to the operators working on the problem, what do you think the first question was? How long till we're up? What's the message? The message is, the way we're successful is jump in and get it running. We got to run to be successful. We as leadership had trained the mill very well to the point where the belief is you have to jump in and keep the mill running. So what's going through this young guy's mind as I am asking him to lock out? This goes deep, by the way. Sometimes a person may not even be able to consciously tell you, but he looks at me and he says, if I do that, the mill won't run. Take that to the next level. If the mill doesn't run, it doesn't make money. If the mill doesn't make money, it closes down. If it closes down, I have to go home and I have to tell my wife and my kids that we can't live in our house, and maybe not in this town, and we have to move. So, what's the answer? Very logical in the individual's mind, because we as managers had also used the production board to measure success at the mill. We ran that mill as if that shift was the last shift that was ever going to be run, and our success was every day by the production board at the end of the shift. So we backed up. By the way, it was very interesting because I asked the managers in the mill, this is how deeply ingrained belief gets. I got excited. I really got excited. I said, I'm on to something big here. So I asked the managers at the mill, how many of these things are there out there, like where people are covering up and where if we put the resources in and we fix it, the mill will run better? And people went, a lot. And I said, well, why don't we fix them? Well, we'd lose off every shift. And I said, well, if we fixed them all, how much better would we run? How much more volume would we make? 15%. I said, we're starting to fix them tomorrow. And the backlash I got was tremendous. We can't do that. How are you going to explain to senior management? We're going to lose production 15% over the next month or two, maybe 3 months, Reynold. Like, this is crazy. And I said, wait a minute. You just told me if we go after all of these things, and most of them are non-capital, and we lose 15% production for over the next 3 months, we're going to run 10 to 15% better. We've got it all back and more within 12 months. And by the way, we get it next year and next year and next year. Forever. Best non-capital investment we've ever made. Best return that we can do. And it still took time to convince people because we had created this belief for a long time. Now I want to stop for a moment and just go sideways and give you an analogy that an individual by the name of Ivan Pupoliti, who came up from the U.S. Forest Service, shared with us. He said, think of a marker buoy in the ocean. It's held there by a chain that runs to the bottom. That chain is held in place by an anchor. And it's a great example of culture because the buoy up top is your practices, the chain is your values, the anchor is what holds it all in place is your beliefs. And that struck me as a powerful thing because I went back to that whole incident that I've just talked about. And what we were doing by bringing in a lockout standard was we were, as Ivan would describe it, we were pushing on the buoy, saying, hey, you got to do this. But we never addressed beliefs or values. We were pushing on the buoy, hoping for a different result. And you can only get that result as long as you're pushing and putting the energy on that push. But if you want to permanently change the location of that buoy, go down and move the anchor. Change the belief. Okay? We highlighted, we did two things in that mill. We changed the first question. When the mill was down, we now walked in and said, what actions have you taken to make sure nobody will get injured in bringing the mill back up? And people would suddenly outline what that was for you. By the way, they'd also tell you, and if we do all those, it'll be up in 40 minutes. You actually got way more information as a manager than you would have gotten otherwise. We changed the belief of what was important. You being uninjured is important. And every time we did one of those fixes and we saw the mill run better, we made sure everyone in the mill knew it, and we told people our long-term success is really dependent on what we produce over a year, and it is worth taking time to take the mill down now if we gain the productivity back. Let me just shorten this to say it was a very powerful, profound effect on myself because up until that point in time, I cared for people. And if I walk around this industry, I will say that most people, by far all people, will say they don't want anybody hurt and they care. Okay, and I care. But I just had difficulty in managing safety by the program because we had separated it from the business. I had a safety meeting, I had a production meeting. You catch what I'm saying there? We all of a sudden integrated, and we said, success this week is that we can hit these kind of numbers without an injury. We don't consider it a successful week if we have an injury. By the way, we also started working on, where do you feel at risk? We also looked at every incident report differently. I want to be clear here for a moment. We were in the lumber business. Somebody else once shared this thought with me. We were in the lumber business. We were not in the safety business. Okay? Sometimes when you start working safety as safety programs separately, you give a different sense of what the business is about. We were in the lumber business. But suddenly what became clear was, okay, we cannot be the best at producing lumber. Think about this for a minute. We cannot be the best at producing lumber, be the pros in the lumber business, be the best prepared to produce lumber, if rather than producing lumber, we produce an off-grade issue of an injured person. If we produce an injured person rather than the product we intended to produce for the marketplace, we have a problem either in our design, in our training, in our skills, in our tools, or the way we support those. Because why else would we injure a person? If we were actually in control of our business, well-designed, well-equipped, right training, right skills, right tools all the time, why would we have an injury? In fact, from there on, when we went to buy a business, first thing I looked at was the injury rates, and if it was high, I said, there is a hell of a lot more opportunity to make money here than this place has been able to make. First indicator of can you make more money? And you looked at every incident report differently. Guy slips off a motor, greasing a grease zerk. Motor top is rounded. Could have stopped at, let's put a little bit of square wire mesh on top, make a more solid foot place. All of a sudden we go deeper. We go, wait a minute, why is the guy having to reach up to the top there? Why in our engineering design would we put the grease points up high and the access point the rounded top of a motor? How many other places do we have at this? And all of a sudden we started dropping the grease lines down so you could do them from the ground. And all of a sudden greasing sped up. And all of a sudden we found out that, you know what, they actually got greased. Because when it was awkward and dangerous and the person was at risk, at 2 o'clock in the morning, they didn't grease them. And the mill ran better. From that little incident, we just looked through all of our mill, and all of a sudden we said, where else do we have awkward maintenance points for these, and why did we design them in, and how the next time do we put a line like this, how do we make sure that we capture that engineering and apply it well? As leaders, we send messages. We create the belief. DuPont, and we did a lot of benchmarking, DuPont would have what you create a safety culture. And I want to be clear again. I don't like to say those words as the objective, but that's what you end up with if you do this right. Okay? But DuPont gave us a very clear insight when we did some benchmarking. 95% of all incidents are caused by behavior. Okay? The second line you don't often hear, but it was a powerful one. 85% of the behavior of your employees is caused by what they believe management wants them to do in order to be successful there. And that belief usually comes from the unwritten actions, words, and questions of management. And by the way, I changed that management to leadership Because it doesn't matter if the leader is the site operator, the president of the company, the well-respected sawyer, the well-respected maintenance person. The new guy learning maintenance off the senior guy, he will eventually want or start to do what he thinks the senior maintenance person wants, hourly or salary. Okay? 85% comes from the beliefs. So again, it's that thing of if you want to shift beliefs, the anchor, and get a different result than what you're getting now, you got to look and say, what do people believe, oftentimes because of what they see from the actions of leaders. And leaders send messages in all kinds of ways that they don't realize. So a part of this, when I said I'm going to challenge you a little bit, a part of this is what messages do you send? A quick way to test this, and I would say, you can do it now while I'm talking, or you can take a piece of paper afterwards. If your employees or people that you lead were having a barbecue this weekend at their place, and there was they invited some of their friends, and by the way, some of their friends brought out-of-town relatives, and they said, hey, what's it like to work at that place? How are your employees going to answer that question just in that short answers where they give? Okay? How are they going to answer that question? And right off the bat, if in their answer, they're not saying, hey, we have a place where people care about us and make sure we're set up to do things right or safe, or that we've got to really look at risks, if that's not in the answer somewhere, then you got to ask yourself, what do you have to do as a leader to get that in the answer? How do you have to change what you ask about? Let me go back now to the actions of leaders and the subtle ones that do it. We had an injury at a mill, paper wrap, paper comes out, it's a little wrinkled at the top, so the process stops. They can't wrap the lumber. Lockout situation. Instead of doing that, the employee reaches up just to tug on the corner, because that's all you got to do. And as the individual does that, breaks the beam for the photo cell. The knife zips across, goes across this part of the hand. All that's holding the hand on is the flap of skin on the back. So the mill manager does the incident investigation. They stop very quickly at the individual needs to be more careful and follow the guidelines. He doesn't accept that answer. He's got that deep question in himself as a leader now, because he's getting in the head of why would a person in a mill I'm responsible for ever think that was the right thing to do from a business perspective. So he brought the whole crew in, brought his supervisors in, shut the doors, said, whatever we say in here does not leave no repercussions for anybody, but I need to understand, why would a person think that that was the right thing to do after all the discussions we've had on the importance of safety? Our number one value is safety, number one priority, all the slogans, all the talk, all the stuff. And I can tell you, the room was quiet for a long time, and nobody was talking, and the guy, to give him credit, said, I really need to know. I really need to know why a person would do that in a mill I'm accountable for. And finally, one of the guys says, well, we all know that it's acceptable practice here that if you are experienced enough, you do not need to follow our standards. And this stunned the manager. And he looked at him and said, help me out. And they said, well, we all know you need gloves to touch the rough lumber. When Harry comes, the supervisor, Harry always checks the lumber, but sometimes he doesn't have his gloves. And we all see Harry walk up, go to get his gloves, realize he doesn't have them. He looks, and then finally he reaches and he grabs the lumber and he takes a look at a few pieces, satisfies himself, and he leaves. And we've all seen Joe come in, and at the outfeed belt, there's a break between the outfeed belt and the next conveyor belt. We all know we have to walk around because that's in the process. We've all seen Joe stop, look, no lumber coming, and cross. So if you guys, with your experience, can make those decisions, and that's how we operate the place, why are you surprised when we do? That was a turnaround moment for that mill. That leadership team had a heart-to-heart. And people send messages in all kinds of ways, and you may walk. If a guy's up on a beam and he should have on fall protection, and you walk past on the way to meeting and you don't even notice that he doesn't have it on, but you wave to him, what's the message? It's acceptable. So, let's just bring this back to when we want to create this culture, how do we get off the plateau? And the reason I'm speaking about this so much is people are really struggling with that. They don't want injuries. But as we're on this journey, it's how do you make that difference? And my comment is, realize that as you manage this, you're improving your process. And as you improve your process and you take the risks out and you do the risk assessments that Bob was talking about, and you ask your people, where are they scared, where are they at risk, where are they uncomfortable, what's causing that process upset, and you start fixing those, injuries go down, production goes up, quality comes more on spec, costs go down. It hangs together. And if you think about it the other way around, you say, if I don't focus on those things, why would I think a place that's got poor design, poor training, poor tools, poor methods, why would it outcompete a place that rigorously goes after those and keeps identifying them through incident investigations and everything else to eliminate them? Why would I think it'd run better? Get excited about an incident investigation as being one of the clearest windows into how you can improve your business. That you've got a fundamental problem in one of those areas that I've talked about. Get excited about it. And the reason I do this is, as people, in our nature, we can keep that front of mind. We can really keep that in front of us every day, far easier than this concept of managing safety. But you know what we get as a result? People going home. People saying they care about me there. People saying, I have to take the time to think about this stuff. I have to identify hazards. If the process goes down, before I go in, I have to think about how I'm going to fix it. They make sure I got the right tools. They make sure I got the right place. You know what? At that barbecue on Saturday night, they say, they care about us. They work with us. They get us involved. And you know what? It's a safe place. Thank you.